Hey guys, welcome back to The Director's Cut, brought to you by the Directors Guild of America, where each episode we bring you a new interview with one of the film industry's top directors, conducted by one of their peers. You can subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Google Play Music, or our SoundCloud page at soundcloud.com/The Director's Cut. This episode takes us behind the scenes of director Rebecca Miller's new romantic comedy, Maggie's Plan, starring Greta Gerwig, Ethan Hawke, and Julianne Moore. The film follows young and independent Maggie, whose plan to raise her child as a single mother gets derailed when she falls for John, an anthropologist whose marriage to the brilliant professor Georgette is in shambles. After breaking up the marriage and marrying John, Maggie realizes she's fallen out of love with him and comes up with a new plan to get John back together with Georgette. Following a screening of the film at the DGA Theater in New York, Ms. Miller spoke with director Robert Benton about the joys and challenges of making Maggie's Plan. Listen on for highlights from their conversation, including how her background in painting influenced the imagery of the film and her unique nonlinear editing process. Enjoy!
I want to say a few words now about this extraordinary film. A.O. Scott said in his review, he used the word generous. And I got very mad at that because that's the exact word I wanted to use. And because it is a generous film. It's a generous film without ever being sentimental. It's clear-headed without ever being cruel. It's a deeply compassionate film about that toughest thing in the world to do a film about, which is life today. And I think it's a splendid work, and it's a privilege for me to be sitting here next to Rebecca. Now, if any of you are expecting a high-minded interview from me, you're not going to get it, okay? I'm going to talk about the nuts and bolts of things because that's what interests me. I begin by asking you a question my wife said I should ask you, which is, do you paint anymore?
I don't paint in the sense that I used to paint, like as a real painter with, on big panels and things like that. But I paint for my movies. I do paint to find the color and composition and mood in movies.
Okay, well, I'm going to go back to that in a minute. Rebecca's mother was an extraordinary photographer named Inga Morath. And I asked before, and I feel compelled to ask it again, how much, because she was not simply a photographer, photographed still lifes and things like that. She was a narrative photographer and splendid and had a great economy of what she did. Has she been an influence in your work?
Definitely. I mean, I think it's interesting because she had a kind of wit and she saw the absurd in a lot of situations. A lot of her photographs have a kind of surreal element to them, but at the same time, they're real life. It's just she observed things wryly and there was no cruelty. There's some photographers that have a more satiric edge, but she had a wit about her photographs, and she talked to me a lot also about the mechanics of composition and what's a great composition. Why are triangles so important inside of compositions? And I remember when I was quite young, she would let me help her figure out which images to use for books and things. And so she was sort of without being didactic about it, she was educating me visually, I think, and also used to take me to museums to look at paintings a lot too.
Because I think Robert Altman once said, films are written in the camera, not on a word processor. And I think Rebecca's films are a great example of that they are, the narrative is contained, is expressed in the photography as much as what people say, that it's not about, cinematography is not about beautiful sunsets or slow motion. It's about character. It's about what you see, and most especially what you don't see. Before we came up here, we were talking about the pan at the end of toward the end of the film where you pan away from where you think you should be going. Can you describe that again?
Well, Well, there's a couple of places that I wanted this idea that I developed with a cinematographer, Sam Levy, of a playful panning and a camera that has a kind of almost prescient quality where it knows more than we do, and it sort of shows us that there's more to the story that the characters knows or you know, so that like when Greta and Ethan are walking down the hall and the camera suddenly just pans down to see that bench, and you don't know why you're looking at that bench, and then it's going to end up being the bench that they sort of sit on to fall in love. Or when they're on the bench talking about his novel and the camera just sort of moves away and it's just standing there and it's empty, and you hear them, and then they walk down that path and they walk into that frame. And so the idea just that you don't necessarily, it's not where you think it's going to go or where it should go, but then eventually that makes sense, but that there's an economy of a visual language too.
It is not just what you see, it's what you choose not to see. Have you worked with the same cinematographer often?
I worked with Ellen Curris for the first 3 films, Angela, The Personal Velocity, and then The Ballad of Jack and Rose. And then I worked with Declan Quinn for The Private Lives of Pippa Lee, and then this one I've worked with Sam Levy. So 3 so far.
When we were talking downstairs, you were talking about the work process with this cinematographer. Could you describe that? Because it seemed to me you went over, it wasn't exactly a shot list that you made, but you described where the camera was roughly in each scene. You describe it. I can't describe it.
No, we did have a shot list, which we developed. We developed one version of it. We started sort of in August, and we went we shot in February. So all that time, the first time we developed a shot list without locations, and the second shot list was with locations. And there were some alterations, and sometimes we'd have to lose a shot here and there because we had quite limited time to make the film. But generally, I felt much safer because we did have limited time. The days were very precious. Sometimes we had to do 2 or 3 moves in a day, company moves where everybody in the company moved. And with those shot lists, also the whole crew could move much faster too. So.
How long was the shooting schedule?
It was 24 days. The 24th day was a bonus because we had made our days so well that the producers
right.
Made it possible for me to have an extra day.
How many hours a day did you shoot?
Well, it was generally we had 12-hour days. I mean, okay. we had a couple of longer days, but we had a couple of shorter days as well. So we managed to make our days mostly.
When you were working, do you do many takes or do you do very few takes? Is a general rule. I know it's not, you can't make
I don't do as nearly as many takes as most people, I think. I do, now I've gotten to a point where I force myself to do more takes than I would often do. Like now I'll do up to 10 takes, sometimes 7 to 7, 8. I used to do 3 all the time. Then I started doing more because I realized also actors like to feel that they have more takes. And also sometimes it's good for me to have that. It's just that I'm from a kind of school of such economy because I came up making these low budget films and it's sort of deep in me. But I rarely would go over 10 takes.
Okay. Is there a difference in the way you're shooting now and the way you shot, say, on Personal Velocity?
Very different.
Could you describe that?
Well, Personal Velocity was, we had 2 cameras, A and B, and A had the best shots, of course, and B had to be getting whatever was left. Right. But we would often assign each camera a character. Let's say there were 2 people in the room, and both cameras were. We had an idea, a shooting plan, especially for A camera because they got all the good compositions. But at the same time, B camera was also getting the other character because we had 16 days to shoot that whole film, and so we had to really be quick. But there was also something about it that was what happened was something interesting happened, which was the actors stopped knowing who was on camera when. They started to create, and they were these little cameras that were like consumer cameras. And so in a way, because it was digital, film, and so it created a very naturalistic effect for the actors. I felt they felt quite liberated. But with this film, it was much more, it was a much narrower scope. Like I knew much better exactly how each shot was going to, as I did with Pippa Lee. It was closer. These two films are closer to the way that they're shot. I was able to be more control it more. But at the same time, I think when I shot Personal Velocity and Jack and Rose, I was really concerned that the technology didn't get in the way of the actors doing their best performances, because I thought, well, without a great performance, my movie's nothing, because my movies are about human beings. So the technology has to rise to meet the actor. And then when I did Pippa and this movie, I started feeling like I think I can make the actors feel free and still have kind of give myself the gift of more, a little bit more, not using two cameras all the time, and although and a little bit more intentional shots all the time. And although sometimes I use two cameras on emotional scenes because I want to save, just make sure the actors are safe and that we can match the, close up with the wide shot.
When you are, I'm going to shift away from cinematography for a moment and talk about writing. When you're writing the screenplay, any screenplay, do you have actors in mind? Whether you use them or not, do you write with a performer in mind, or do you write with someone you've known in your life in mind?
I often write with people I know, and real people in mind. Right. I base a lot of my characters on people I know. Not really. Maggie is not exactly someone I know. She was an amalgam because, of course, she came from a book, and then she was sort of, I changed that character quite a lot, whereas Georgette is closer to what it was in the book. And then like the friends, like for example, Tony is completely based on one of my best friends, and anybody who knows him knows that. And the Pickle Man is also based on someone I know. So I do that quite a lot.
Did you do much rewriting on this?
Yeah, I did. I mean, the process of finding the script, the first version of the script took a while because I had this wonderful kind of the geometry of the armature that was the novel, but it was only a few chapters in a much bigger novel, and so there was no friends, there was no Pickle Man, there was no real plot exactly. So there was the switch and the idea of like her trying to give her husband back to his ex-wife, but there wasn't. So it took a while to find that, and I talked to a lot of people at that time. Like Karen Rinaldi, had many conversations with her, who's the writer. Rachel Horowitz, one of the producers. Sabine Hoffman, who's my editor, I talked to a lot. Cindy Tolan, who's the casting director that I've worked with forever, and she's also a kind of dramaturg, so I talked to her a lot. And everybody would give me would just ask me questions. Those are the best kind of notes, I find, that not like telling you what to do, but asking questions like, I remember Rachel saying, Tony has to, John has to find out. So what happens when John finds out? So then that would be great. But then what was exciting was then once I cast, that was the next stage of rewriting, because the actors almost had to kind of, they were almost advocates for their characters. And Julianne said, I think I need to be seen to be in my profession. And so then I wrote the auditorium scene, for example.
So, but there are then a lot of rewriting connected with the casting, so that you then shape it so that it fits the actor who's doing it.
Right.
Great. That is very few writers tend to do that. They tend to think this is the word, the actor comes to meet me. We don't come to meet the actor, and it's very important to make sure that you do that, and that not a lot of people do.
Right. No, I think for me, it's one of the great joys of it, right? So someone's like sew it on them, and of course, they're going to create a character. I mean, they're creating a character, but it's got to be, I think it's nice to have that opportunity to have some months to be able to have that give and take. I like that.
What is the rehearsal process like for you?
Well, I do. We had a table read, which I don't normally do because I don't like to exhaust the words. But what we did was we had other actors do it, except for Greta did it, and other actors that we cast, because I didn't want. Well, first of all, we hadn't cast the whole movie yet anyway, but I didn't want to blow all these great moments like that you really want to have on screen.
Right.
So I have this thing where, you know, what we did was we did that just to hear the rhythms, and then later when we had cast the whole thing, I would have them come for a couple of hours, read through the scenes, discuss whether certain things didn't make sense, or there were parts of scenes that didn't need to be there, or if somebody didn't feel right saying something that just wasn't coming out right, then we would kind of alter it and play with it. Talk a little bit about physical stuff. But I'm very light. Like I have a very light touch in rehearsal because I want to see it all happen on screen. So it's that thing of like, you know, you want to be prepared and make everyone feel safe, but you don't want to exhaust it.
Do you allow room for improvisation?
Well, there wasn't a lot of improvisation. Like, for example, Julianne wanted no improvisation because she learned her accent exactly to like the score of the script. Right. So there would in any of her scenes, nobody was, you know, changing. The place that there's the most improvisation in this is between Maya and Bill when he's grating the cheese, and she's you know, they're talking about Odette and all that stuff. Right. That there's improvisation in there that was built in. The little girl was made up a few things. Definitely.
You made them up very well. Did the accent that Julianne uses, did that come from the book, from you, or from her?
Well, in the book she was French, and both the author and I felt she shouldn't probably be French because it felt like, you know, maybe you'd heard a lot of French accents. We talked about it, me and Julianne talked about it, and we thought about German, and then we thought maybe that had too much baggage. And then Swedish was too lilting, so we arrived at Danish, because she had a friend who was Danish, and she said, that's a great accent, and I think I could, you know, do it. And so we did that.
But that is, again, letting the actor participate in what the character becomes.
Definitely. Absolutely.
How soon from the time you had the script in what you considered was workable shape did you start the casting process?
How long did it take to get the script to the workable shape?
No. Once you had the script and what you thought was workable shape, not finished completely, but workable, when did you then begin the casting process?
Well, I guess pretty much when we had it right, then we had to cast in order to really get all the money that we needed, you know, because it was cast contingent. So Julianne Moore was the first piece of the puzzle, and she said yes right away. She's somebody I know well, and you know, I think she was just so tempted by that scene in the snow in particular. She loved that scene. And then I met Greta Gerwig and fell in love with her and thought she was the only person I just felt she was just exactly right for this. And then came the hunt for John and figuring out who should be John, you know. But basically as I remember it, it was all over that summer before we shot, where we were casting the last of the, like, Bill Hader and Maya Rudolph and all of that came then, and that early fall before we shot. But so pretty much when I had a script, then we started to look into it. And because, as you know, it's like, it's without a cast, I certainly could never get the money without cast.
Let me go back to the question I started asking earlier. Once you had the cast and once you had the money, then the formal rehearsal process, sitting down in a room and reading the script through or breaking it into scene, how did you organize that?
Well, it would be, we had the table reading happened much earlier when I think we didn't even have all our money yet, but the moment we actually had all our actors, it was, maybe 3 weeks out before we shot, and we would just organize, they'd come to my office and we would sit down, and we had a week during which we were going to do this, and it would be Greta and, like, let's say, Greta and Ethan, and they read through all of their scenes, and then Ethan and Julianne, and then, they would read through all of their scenes, and we kind of picked them apart and talked about them and I listened to them, and, and then with Julianne and Greta, the same thing, and you could sort of feel you could just feel the scenes, and without doing a lot of directing exactly, in the sense of trying to change. I was more observing and trying to gauge where there might be things that I would have to kind of shift on set a little bit.
Can you give an example of that? Of something that happened that you had to, on the set, you had to make a shift?
Well, for example, Travis Fimmel had a lot of ideas, who played the Pickle Man, had a lot of ideas and was very, very imaginative with all sorts of things, like the flowers that he takes out of his pocket. That was his idea. He had a lot of those, but he had so many that it was almost like you had to kind of like say, okay, let's just use one and like figure out how to. And so it was kind of trying to kind of both encourage that wonderful creativity and in a gentle way, pull back so that there weren't too many things.
But most directors don't listen to actors at all. They really,
I think that's like,
it's an awful thing.
That's sort of like really not. It's sort of like leaving a lot of money in the bank in a pot of gold, and not, because they're full of. The thing is, though, isn't it? It's like, I guess the fear is once you open that Pandora's box that they won't stop, that they'll just take over the whole joint,
right.
But I think that you have to have the confidence and that they'll respect when you say no and when you put limits on things. It is kind of a hard row to hoe, like between the two things, between opening up and staying your course, and also making people, like Julianne, this performance she took a lot of risks with this performance.
Yeah.
It's like big, kind of big, and she was always asking me, please tell me, am I going too far? And so, it was my job to make sure to tell her if I felt that she was going too far, or that,
right.
But for the most part, her taste, she has such good taste and a sense of what is really. So the truth is and also there was some things I could pull back in the editing too.
Then, because you do a number of takes, say 3 to 5 takes.
Yeah.
You have a choice in the editing of performance, that you can shape the performance once again in the editing.
Yes. Yes.
And do you allow actors in the shooting variations so that you can accommodate that you can accommodate ideas they have, plus not being forced to accept all the ideas they have.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
Exactly. Right. So somebody wants to try something a completely different way, it never hurts to do that. Once you've tried it the way you thought you should do it, as long as it's still inside the character, like, why not try it different ways? I find that usually things kind of, it's not like you're going to get completely disparate ideas. They usually have some kind of containing force, like some kind of logic that they stay inside of, I think. You're not going to suddenly play something like crying and then laughing hysterically. Like, it's usually kind of going very smaller variations within the theme. But I welcome all of that. And I sometimes think that, it'd be interesting to play more in a kind of expansive rehearsal process that doesn't necessarily involve the script. I have something about the exhausting words, almost like words are magic. And I feel like an actor saying something on camera they're expending energy of the words. And if you use the words up too much, then you have the danger that they're dead. But on the other hand, experimentation can be kind of great, and like physical experimentation and so on. So I don't know. I mean, maybe one day I'll figure out a way. I used to write entirely other scenes for people to rehearse, like scenes that were almost the same, but with different words.
Really?
Yeah.
That's a wonderful idea. I mean, steal that idea. That's
yeah, please do.
It gives you the same scene, but it opens it up for the actors.
Yeah, and then they can, and then you have like it's just very labor intensive, and also you need time. But I would like to one day kind of have a moment where we could all go away together and have a week of doing that. And sometimes it's hard because actors have schedules and lives and families, and you're lucky to get them for any time, really.
But that, we were talking before, I may have mentioned this earlier, that from the very beginning, from the first film of Rebecca's that I saw, straight through this, she has a kind of authority, and authority can't be learned, and authority can't be manufactured, and it just is. And either you have it or you don't have it, and it's like a gift given, and maybe some people don't take advantage of it, but Rebecca's done an extraordinary job with absolute authority. All of these pictures, if you go back, they have an utter command of what the picture should be without making the actors of the cinematographers slaves to that command. And I think that's an astonishing thing to be able to say about yourself, or just for me to say about you.
Well, thank you.
Is there any question that anyone else would like to ask? Otherwise, I'll dither on forever.
Oh, the editing process and how much am I there? I'm very present. I mean, the editor is usually begging me to stay out of the editing room for 2 weeks or a week and a half so she can just do her cut. She's like, please, just don't show up for that period of time so she could cut the whole film, together, that first pass. So she does a whole pass, and then I go in, and every movie is different. Like with Jack and Rose, which I cut the movie backwards first. She had done her thing, but then I went to the end because I thought the end has to work. And then I moved my way all the way to the beginning, and then we started at the beginning again, and we started moving our way that way, or sometimes you might start at the beginning, but then cut islands in, where I don't always cut like from the beginning and just cut like in a line that way, but I am always, she has often the morning to work. She loves to have a couple of hours to try things so that she can have her creative, her freedom. But then I'm there and I'm standing over every cut. And I used to, when I made Pippa Lee, I was cutting it in Ireland, and I would lie down with my littlest son then still, and to put him to sleep and to entertain myself, because I had to lie there for ages. He didn't want me to leave the room. I would count the cuts in my scenes, and I figured out that I had an average of 16 cuts per scene.
Wow.
For some reason, every scene seemed to be 16 cuts. I thought, how strange. Just like, shows you how long it took to put him to sleep. But so I'm very precise, but I also let her, Sabine Hoffman, this is my 4th film I made with her. And so we have a real connection and trust.
Can I ask you a question? Going back, not leaving out anything, but when you're writing, how important is it that you have the ending before you actually get to the ending? That when you're writing the script, you know where you're going, or is that sort of, you let it work itself out?
Well, sometimes I think I have the ending, and then there's another surprise ending,
Yeah, that's very good.
I'm working towards something usually. But like, for example, in this, I thought the ending was Maggie and Lily walking off together after the wedding of John and Georgette. Originally, that was my. And then Karen Rinaldi, the writer, said to me one day, it's so funny, like in life, just when you think you've got it all sewn up and figured it out, something else happens. Something else comes along. And just something about the way she said that, I thought, of course, the pickle man has to come back because, you know, she's got it all sewn up. She's going to have this nice life. She's got this beautiful baby. She's gotten these two people back together. Right. And just when it's all nice and neat and tidy, here he comes. And so that's an example of like, you think you've got it all.
I didn't expect that. And it was really satisfying when he showed up.
That's great.
Because he made, the mess started to happen again.
Yes, that's exactly, the mess starts again.
When you're writing, to go back to that, do you keep it free and open, as you say you seem to be doing in the direction, and then tighten it up and tighten it up and tighten it up so you have exactly what you. I'm very impressed that you give everybody a chance to say this is what they want, and listen to them and treat them very seriously. And go ahead.
Yes, I mean, I do. Usually I start very small, like short. I don't write usually like some people write 200 pages and then they lop off bits. I tend to write like a nugget and I expand. And in the case of this film, then I had to contract a bit because I needed to get it down to a certain page number. But I definitely leave room. Usually I have quite a small thing that then leaves room for expansion and for detail and for embellishment, and it starts to kind of, because I don't want to write badly and puff it up and then all of a sudden I don't know how to get out of that. You know, I'd rather have everything be good, even if it's kind of small.
Exactly. That's very wise. I've done enough pumped up pictures that I did shred that I respect that very much. Again, anyone else have any questions?
Our budget was under $10 million. That's mysterious enough for you. And under 20 too. No, it was a modest budget. It was, I don't know, am I supposed to talk about the budget? It's like well under 10. Yeah, that most painters make more experimental films. Well, I did make experimental films when I started out. But you know, to me, the visual, how do you tell it? Color is very, very important to me still. And every film has a different level of words. Like this is very much a movie that's, the humor is fired on by words, but a lot of the emotional meaning is carried through the images and where the composition is and how it's, you know, it's told as a visual story. And in fact, in a way, I was even more keen to make sure that all the color really made sense and the compositions made sense because it's such a word movie. So me as a painter is definitely still there. And I did start with paintings that had no sound and no beginning and no end, and they were in galleries, but I didn't want to stay there. I didn't want to keep going with that. The influence of my father on my writing. Well, yes, in a sense that I listened to him read his work out, so I'm sure I was influenced. And he also started with character, was really kind of very character based in terms of the way he wrote. But in the end, the honest answer is I don't think any of us knows how much our parents have formed us, really. I don't think there's a way of judging that. I'd say, yeah, so I don't know, but I'm sure.
Can I ask you a question? Were there scenes that were written, that were shot, and I don't really know what they were, but scenes that were written and shot, and then in the editing process, they simply vanished?
You know, unlike any other film I've ever made, there's only one scene in this movie that was cut, and it was a small scene with Lily, which was meant to come between Maggie and Lily in the bedroom. It was the first scene between Lily in Lily's bedroom, and it was supposed to be after they have their love night in Chinatown. Right. And then she's so depressed and she's just like looking at Lily sleeping, and there's no dialogue. But we cut 45 minutes out of dialogue out of the movie. So no scenes were cut.
Okay, but it was tightened up.
But tight. It was like constantly cutting anything that just wasn't really working, you know?
Were there times where you found yourself cutting things that you loved and you thought you loved and you thought you couldn't do without, but they suddenly just slipped away?
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember them anymore, so I guess they weren't that important. But yeah, there were things that I thought that I loved, but at the same time, nothing that ended up really being essential, and everything was for performance. A lot of it was for performance, to make sure that every performance was absolutely the strongest. Like, I'm really obsessed with that, which I'm sure all directors are, like, just not leaving my actors hanging out in any way high and dry, it's not to say they didn't all deliver great performances. They did, but I think part of the job is just making sure that all the best things that they did, that you're really looking frame by frame, like you might be switching between 3 or 4 takes in a scene, but some of it was for time contraction, because like one of the most important things in this movie was the pace. So the idea that you have this kind of frothy pace, which then gets quiet for a bit. And there's actually a scene where it's the scene where she talks about her mother. So that's where, he takes her home she takes him to her house to get a sweater or whatever. They have the hot whiskey. And there was quite a long sequence in which he holds up a rabbit of hers, this stuffed rabbit. And I had to cut that whole sequence out because it was just too long. I was like, what are we going to do? Because we have this rabbit. And so now we just cut that whole sequence out. And for no reason, he has a rabbit on his lap. And only one person has ever noticed that he's got this little rabbit.
That's so great. That's a great thing in movies. There are these things that you think everybody's bound to know, and they don't.
No, it was amazing.
Little details that you think nobody will notice, and they all see it.
Yeah. Oh, God. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, a part of I think the joy of making this movie was that I had come back from living in Ireland for some years, and I was so happy to be in New York. And there was something about my happiness that I think got into the movie. I would look at the light in the morning, and I would drop off my kids at school, and I would look at the pink winter light and think how beautiful it was, and look in Washington Square Park. And I knew some of these locations so well that I would know, well, if you look east, this is the light. And if you look west, this is the light. And we looked, locations, we thought a lot about locations, and we thought a lot about how to, there was a huge amount of thought that went into it. Also, for example, the location that is Maggie's apartment, I actually rented virtually the same apartment when I was starting out, from a poet, actually, who had endless books in this apartment. So there was a lot of things that I could draw from that point of view. But then, bringing it to Chinatown was so nice too. Like, I think you ended up with this really feeling of a full sense of New York that I loved. We shot in Williamsburg. That was really fun. Yeah. Anyway.
But that's one of the things that I hadn't thought about. Well, this is absolutely correct. Every moment in this picture was believable. Every place they went was believable. There was no place where what are they doing there? It was all cohesive. The world you created was so real and so believable that I thought, well, wait, you don't live in New York, do you?
Well, I do. I mean, I lived for years in New York. Then we went away for 6 years. Then 7 years. Then we came back.
Right.
And now I do again. So yeah, I definitely consider myself a New Yorker. Okay. Yeah.
But I mean, the truth of those scenes, the truth of the places, the way the people behave in that academic world is so extraordinary.
Well, I got a lot of help from that. I have a friend, my friend Barbara Browning, she's a professor at NYU, and it was she who actually really helped me a lot with the academic stuff, because even though I was saying to you, I teach now and then at NYU, I'm not a professor in that world, and she helped me a lot kind of penetrate that world, and in terms of the language. And in fact, I even use a piece of one of her papers when Georgette is talking about that whole thing about Pussy Riot. That last paragraph is right out of one of my friend's papers. the relationship between Lily and Maggie and how we established that rapport, and and Ethan as well. Well, Greta went over to Ida Rohatton's house, because Ida Rohatton is the daughter of the composer Michael Rohatton. So she would go over to his house and her house, and they played a few times, and they just spent time together. And Greta just fell in love with this little girl. I mean, she is kind of a brilliant child. This kid is just very, very special. And so, by the time we got to set, they had really spent quite a lot of time together. And Ethan has a child in Ida's class in school. So it kind of like all worked out that there was a sort of really familiarity there between all of them. Casting, you mean, did we consider other girls? Oh, yeah. We looked at a lot of other little girls. I mean, not a lot, maybe a handful of other girls, but some of them were already actors, and they were kind of like mechanized in a way that she was so natural. And she wasn't that easy to work with, in the sense that she would arrive and say, I don't want to do this. I am not doing this. Forget about it. For like the first 45 minutes. And then gradually, we would cajole her into doing it. And then she would be great. Then she would suddenly start doing the scene. Everyone had to run to their posts because, you had to get it in there.
Oh, that's a great story. Oh.
Well, of course we consider, there's lots of people to consider and think about, but the wonderful thing about Ethan, he was a really good friend of Rachel Horowitz's, the producer, and so we were able to get to him. He's a New York person. I kind of like the idea that the main characters were all really New Yorkers. There was just something right about that. And also Ethan, being kind of between the ages of these two women worked, because if he gets to be too old, then I thought, then that is weird. Then it becomes all about age. I didn't want it to be about age. I wanted it to be about these individual people. He's perfect. He's perfect.
But I think he had to do the most difficult thing. He had to be a kind of almost failure, almost success. And he handled that so well. I believed him. I believed them all, but I believed him. And I think that was one of the trickiest performances to give, and to not overdo one side or overdo the other. I think he was brilliant in this picture.
I'm so glad you said that, because it's like, I think it's not everyone sees how difficult that is to do. Also the subtlety, like John has to be different things depending on whose lens you're looking at him through. You're looking at him in the beginning through the lens where he's this sort of hunk. Then he turns into a pain in the ass. Then he becomes this sort of actually, then he becomes a failure. Then he becomes sort of a success when you see this guy coming up and asking him to sign his book. So you're constantly thinking different things of him, and he was able to play all of those Johns really well.
But he's also, the character. Yes, he did it brilliantly, and the character you wrote was one of those characters who's not a character on paper, who's a character in life, and that's one of the hardest things in the world to write, is that character who's so nuanced and so believable, and to find the perfect person, because I really thought the casting was all extraordinary in this movie. In some ways, Ethan had the trickiest role to play, because he just screwed it up, and he was one, and you loved him, but he just screwed it up.
Yeah.
I may have taken the wrong thing out of that, but
absolutely. But also one of my favorite moments is where he says, after the whole thing has happened and it's worked, the trick has worked, and she's crying because after all, even though it was her plan, she's still being left by her husband. He still slept with somebody else. And then he says, I don't know what to do. And she's like, go back to Georgette. And he says, you think?
Yeah.
And it's like, it was a great moment. That's an improvisational line. That's an example of an improvisational line. That was a great moment where he was like, you think?
It is a great moment. Yeah. It's a fabulous
He's
moment.
like, yeah, I think so.
But that's what makes this more than a movie. Those tiny moments that make a picture really work. And it's an accumulation of those things that are vital in making a picture go from being good to being great. Yes. with that, thank you all very much.
Thanks for listening to another DGA Q&A. You can watch video of all our director Q&As on our website and our YouTube channel. And stay subscribed to the Director's Cut for more Q&As and highlights from other DGA events, as well as selections from our archive. Also on our website, you can explore our visual history program with long-form oral history interviews that delve deep into the careers of veteran DGA members. Check out the program at dga.org/craft/visual history. And if you're enjoying the Director's Cut, please subscribe to it on iTunes, SoundCloud, or Google Play Music so you won't miss an episode. And leave us a review. We'd love to hear your feedback. Thanks for listening and have a great week. This podcast is produced by the Directors Guild of America. Music is by Dan Wally.